we should be thinking a lot more about how our relationships with our phones impact us both mentally and physically, and putting out better boundaries to protect ourselves.
Hi, welcome to Resonate, Conversations and Life Lessons from Rancho La Puerta. I'm your host, Barry. You know, it's virtually impossible to block out and disconnect from all the noise and distractions in our world. Luckily, there's places that make it a little easier to do so. Places like Rancho La Puerta. Here at the ranch, with designated Wi-Fi spots, no TVs, limited cell phone usage, we encourage our guests to spend more time in nature, more time with themselves, and more time interacting with real live people. Our co-founder Deborah says that you can't connect with your inner true self unless you disconnect with all the outside distractions. And that inner self is where you'll find joy and peace. My guest today is Catherine Price, an award-winning journalist and speaker. She mostly focuses on science-based, evidence-based topics. She's written 4 books. Her latest book, How to Break Up with Your Phone. And by phone, she means this little computer that we carry 24/7 and spend so many hours of our lives on. Catherine's not suggesting that we throw this out the window. There's so many valuable things that this tool does for us. What she is encouraging us to do is find a healthy relationship with our phone and the technology around us. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Barry. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you? I always like to find out where you're coming from today. Where are you at?
I am in Philadelphia in a co-working space that makes it look like I'm in a cell, but I'm not.
Oh, so you're on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
I interviewed someone the other day who was in Japan. It was like 12-hour time difference. So
oh, wow.
It was fun. So now you're a journalist, and I was reading. You have I have a master's in journalism. So, but you have a lot of interests. You have written several books, from everything from vitamins to fun to places to go before you die. But I saw you this summer, and you spoke at the ranch and about this book. It's called How to Break Up with Your Phone. And I love this idea. I love this concept, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this book. So what made you decide to write this particular book?
Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be here talking with you, and it was a real treat to get to go to the ranch and talk about how to break up with your phone, because that's actually how I met you in the first place.
That's right.
It was through this book. Yeah, it was, I think, in 2018 or 19. So it's been a while. So it's wonderful to see you again and to get a chance to talk about phones with the ranch's audience and everyone else listening. So the story behind How to Break Up with Your Phone is that well, first of all, didn't ever think I would be writing about technology. It's not an inherent interest of mine per se. But I had my daughter in 2015 and had also been taking a lot of mindfulness classes. And I had a couple of moments when I was with her and I started to notice, there's this like baby who's looking at me, her mother, and I am looking down at my phone doing something totally meaningless. And I realized that's not what I want to be doing, not just because I don't want that to be the impression I'm giving my daughter, but also because I don't want to be living that way. You know, if I'm looking down at my phone when I'm around her, when else am I looking down at my phone? So at that point, there weren't that many books talking about this issue. It certainly wasn't a subject of conversation in the way it is now. So I did try to look around and see what's been written about this subject, what's out there. Is there a solution? And I found that there were a couple of books that kind of talked about the general potential issues of technology, but there was not a solution. And so I thought, well, maybe I could actually create one. And so I decided that I would write How to Break Up with Your Phone, or the book that became How to Break Up with Your Phone, and look at why it's so hard to look away from our phones and screens, what it's doing to us, and then also provide an evidence-backed plan for what people can do to actually take back control from their devices.
Yeah. Well, how much time do you think the average American spends on their phone per day? And it probably varies by age groups.
Yeah, it's hard to get precise statistics because it's hard to measure the time, and Apple doesn't reveal the statistics. But the best statistics I've found is that the average American adult is spending about 4.5 hours a day on their phones, just their phones, not computers or anything else, and that adds up to more than 60 full days a year. It's like 2 months. or it's like basically a quarter of your time awake, which is pretty nuts to think about. And then if you look at other age groups, the numbers are often even higher. And the amount for social media is particularly high. So the best statistics I've found for American teenagers is they're spending about 5 hours a day just on social media. That's probably between screens, different devices, but yeah, 5 hours a day on screens and about 7 or more hours a day on non-schoolwork based screen time.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this interview last week. I had an appointment in La Jolla, California, and so I was driving down the street, and I kept hitting these stop signs, and at every stop sign there was a bus stop, right? And so I just glanced over and looked, and there would be like a minimum of 20 people standing of all ages at the bus stop. And every single one, I kid you not, was just staring at their phone. I'm like, the entire time, the whole stoplight while I was sitting there, I was like, if this bus came out of control, it would just wipe them all out because they never looked up from their phones, not once. You
Right,
know,
right. It's the kind of thing where we've kind of gotten habituated to think it's normal. And then if you have a moment like you did and you kind of see this scene as if it's the first time you're seeing it, then you're like, wait, what? Or if you imagine yourself from 2006, because the first iPhone was 2007, coming across this scene, being like, what are they looking at? What's going on? But now
right.
it just seems totally normal.
Right. So, and I did read that I think 90% of Americans own a smartphone now. And I think it's not realistic to think that we're not going to have smartphones and not be on phones. So what do you consider a healthy relationship with a phone?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important question because I think a lot of times people try to sort of reduce their screen time because they feel vaguely guilty about it, but they haven't really thought very much about what they want their relationship with technology and their device to be. And there's, of course, many amazing things about smartphones, and they make our lives easier in a lot of ways. I should also say I had a funny experience recently where I was giving a talk and I somehow, between giving my talk and going out the door, which is not a far distance, managed to lose my phone for a full week. I just didn't have a phone. So I actually can speak to that from very recent experience of what it's like to try to navigate, 2024 without a smartphone or really any phone. But what I tell people is that it's a personal decision of what a healthy relationship looks like. What feels good to me may not be the same as what feels good to you. And the point of, quote, breaking up with your phone is not to dump your phone. Just like if you break up with a person, you're not saying, that's it. Like, I'm never dating another person again. I mean, maybe you are, but, normally it's because you want to have a better, healthier relationship. So I personally come at it from asking myself or other people, how do you feel about the amount of time you're spending on your phone? And then more specifically, how do you feel about the amount of time you're spending on particular apps? Because I think that's where we really need to focus. I have not met anyone in the 6 years since this book came out who said, I feel really bad about Google Maps, or like, oh, my banking app, I just can't look away. Like, people don't have problems. Those are kind of the Swiss Army knife kind of tools of the phone that actually make things easier and more convenient. I haven't heard anyone regret, music. But the things you hear people regret are the apps that are specifically designed to suck us in, which are things like social media, games, often the news. Sometimes it's work related, but shopping, dating, those are
Right.
all the apps that actually make more money the more time we spend on them. So they're designed to
Right.
suck us in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that I have found that's happened to me in recent years is because I didn't grow up having a cell phone. And I can remember my first job where I had a voicemail thinking, wow, this is so awesome. I don't have to answer the phone. I can just listen to voicemail. But now at work, I'm getting text all the time. And it's just like they expect that they send a text that you need to respond within a minute,
Hmm.
regardless of where you are and what you're doing. And it seems like a lot of pressure. And so I was talking about the healthy relationship with your phone. What are some of the detrimental things to your health about having a phone? I now have this case on my phone, right? That's supposedly stops the radiation from,
Oh, I think we have
'cause
the same phone case. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, because someone was saying that all that radiation, and someone even mentioned, I don't know if it's statistically true or not, but the amount of cancer, like brain cancer and things, people are getting now from having the phone next to their ear all the time because there is radiation in the phone, right?
I don't know as much about the radiation issue as I should, although I'm laughing because I'm realizing the reason I have the phone case that I do is that the first time I went to Rancho La Puerta, I met another speaker who showed me her phone case. Maybe she showed you her phone case. And then I was like, oh, I kind of like it. I mean, in this perhaps because the radiation thing, but also just because it happens to be one of the phone cases that has a cover on it. And so you close your phone in the case like a book. And so you don't see the screen. And that's actually really helpful. But there's a lot of different ways that our phones are negatively affecting us, both mentally and also physically. And I would say, kind of speaking to that, I guess the physical, but kind of a combination of those two things. What you were getting at with this feeling that you always have to be on call, that you constantly have to be answering other people immediately, is it really creates this pressure and this stress that can be very draining. And I don't think we've fully come to terms with how draining and how physical that effect can be when you are constantly feeling like you have to respond. And I think there's a challenge that comes with having so many different ways that we're reachable now. You know, it's not just a phone call, it's text messages, it's not just email, it's Slack. There's all of these, it's social media DMs. You're constantly tending to other people's needs. So not only does that distract you from whatever you might actually want to do with your time, but it actually feels very draining, and it encourages us to be in a constant state of trying to multitask, which is actually something our brains can't do. We can't do more than one thing at once, one thing at a time. And multitasking actually causes physical changes in our body, like increasing our heart rates, increasing blood pressure, causing a stress response, which is a big deal because whereas a little bit of stress, like an acute period of stress, actually can be really motivating. You know, if you have a deadline, that feeling of stress will help you get it done. If you need to run away from something, having that physical stress is a good thing because it will enable you to run away. But over time, the elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone cortisol, are really bad for us. They increase our risk for all sorts of long-term health outcomes. And so, you know, I think that we should be thinking a lot more about how our relationships with our phones impact us both mentally and physically, and putting out better boundaries to protect ourselves. I have to say, when I lost my phone for the week, I went through this kind of panic stage of, oh my God, you know, what am I going to miss? Like, and not the sense of news on my phone per se, but more, who am I going to leave hanging? I also had this funny additional thing where, you know, everyone's like, Catherine, why don't you just ping your phone? Why don't you just call your phone? I'm like, because I put my phone on airplane mode because I was giving a talk, and you can't break through airplane mode if airplane mode is on. So none of those things worked. And I had this worry that I was not going to respond to an important text message, or I'm going to miss an important phone call. When I got the phone back a week later, I basically missed nothing. You know, I sent some text. I figured out how to send some text from my computer, but not really that many. I noticed that when I don't send that many texts, I don't get that many texts, and I didn't miss a single phone call that was important. So it actually was a really good wake up call, even for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember being a teenager and not having a phone and still having relationships and still having fun and maybe even more than I have now. This is another aspect to the cell phone that kind of drives me crazy is that, well, I just read, I don't know how, because I use my phone to get Chat GPT and they tell me that there's, 1.6 million traffic accidents a year because people are texting on their phones. That's just in the United States.
Yeah, there's been a big increase actually in accidents and fatalities in the United States. And perhaps unsurprisingly, one of the leading hypotheses as to why that might be happening is that there's so much more distracted driving. I mean, that's when you start to realize, wow, this is a little bit, I don't want to say it's out of our control because it is under our control, but there's something subconscious going on in terms of how we're being manipulated by the apps and algorithms, because any logical person knows that staring at a phone while you're driving a car 75 miles an hour down the freeway is a bad idea. Or when you're crossing the street, looking at your phone while you're crossing the street, not a good idea. When your kids are in the car, I mean, I've heard students tell me, I remember this one girl saying her mom was driving her to school and her mom had the phone propped up next to the dashboard and was watching a movie while driving her daughter to school. Is that a good idea? No, it is not. So it's just interesting to realize like there's a disconnect between our logical thought and how we're interacting with our phones.
Yeah. I feel like we're going to bypass that because I saw the latest Tesla. It doesn't even have a steering wheel or a dashboard. It's going to be, you get in and you tell it where you want to go. And then you can be on your phone and watching a movie or do whatever. It just takes you there. So, I mean, it's funny how our priorities are changing so much.
Yeah.
How does being on your phone, is there any science that says how it affects your memory and your brain functioning?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what happens when we're on our phones a lot, and more specifically when we're switching between apps and then switching our attention between the real world and the stuff on our phones, and the kind of content we're consuming on our phones, which tends to be very shallow, not like a long form article, but like little snippets of stuff, we're really training ourselves to be in a constant state of distraction and also to be in this shallow level of our brains. And our brains respond to what we do and to what we put into them. Like our brains are actually constantly changing. They're not just fixed. We are able to learn things as adults, maybe not as well as when we were kids, but our brains have the ability to change. And so when we constantly are doing stuff that involves distraction or just very shallow thinking, that's what we're training our brains to do. If you're distracted, you're not going to be able to form a memory because you won't have experienced the experience to begin with. So you won't have a short-term memory of the experience. But fascinatingly, in order to get a short-term memory into long-term memory, your brain actually has to make new proteins. And that actually gets interrupted if you're distracted. Like there is a physiological disruption that happens. So you can't make the brain changes that store the memory. That's really pretty nuts to think about. The impact that being distracted could have not just on your immediate memories, but your long-term memories of your life, because you literally could not make the proteins that would have encoded that memory in your brain. If you think about how you can come up with an insight or where creativity comes from, I would argue that it requires having a lot of raw material in your mental pantry to draw connections between things that might seem like they're not connected. Well, what are those raw materials? Those are memories of experiences that you've had. If you have a bare pantry and you've no memories of things you've read or things you've experienced or conversations you've had, how can you come up with anything new or interesting? So I think, and I rarely hear this talked about, I truly think that the way that we interact with our phones day to day is having an impact on our ability to have creative, deep thoughts. And it's certainly having an enormous effect on our relationships. If you think about how rarely we're actually fully present with one another. And I find it really upsetting to hear from young people about this. I was just recently watching some clips of some teenage girls who were saying that they literally do not remember a time when they were together with their friends where everyone wasn't just on their phones. And what does that feel like? Like you were saying, Barry, our experiences when we were younger, when we didn't have phones, you were actually with your friends. And even if it wasn't like the best time, you were still together and having fun and not focusing on what was happening somewhere else. It's such a different experience now, and it's really having an impact on some of our most important relationships.
Yeah, I was this past weekend I was at a concert and I looked out and at least 75% of the people were not watching the concert. They were watching their phones, taking a picture of the concert. And I was just
Right.
like, why didn't you just stay home and watch that on TV?
I
mean,
know. I heard.
I
I think it
just
was John Oliver. He said something like, "Do you really want to just get a?" He used some expletives, but he's like, "You really want to get a bad recording on a small screen and watch it later, as opposed to being here now." I recently got a chance to talk to the CEO of Yonder, which is a company that makes phone pouches that are used both in schools and also at a lot of concerts. And he had a great way of talking about that. He was like, every time someone takes out a phone, maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal, but you're in this shared experience, this kind of sacred space in a way. And every time someone does that, it's a tiny pinprick in this bubble that is holding you all together in this moment. And you just lose the energy in that space through each one of those pinpricks. And so I personally haven't gotten to go to one of the shows where everybody has their phone in a pouch, but I would imagine it's such a different experience compared
yeah.
to what you just described.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I noticed when you were at the ranch, you were here during Family Week, and one of the
Mhm.
talks that you gave about phones, there were so many young people, especially teenagers, at your talk. Do you find that teenagers are feeling that they need to have time away from their phone, get off some of the apps? Are you feeling that to be the case?
Well, in that particular case you're talking about, I think a lot of those teenagers were there because their parents had come to my talk the day before.
Ah,
Their
okay. Well,
parents were literally like, "Can you please do that talk for our teenagers?" And I said, "I can if you make them be in the room," because it was
okay.
up
Yeah.
against like balloon animal water polo. It was very unfair. So there no one would have shown up. But there were actually, as you were saying, there were like 35 teenagers in that room, and I thought it was actually fascinating to
hmm
see their reactions where, I wasn't coming at it from like oh, phones are bad, you're dumb for wanting a phone. But it was more like, do you guys recognize how you're being manipulated into spending all of your time on these platforms where essentially they're making money off of you? Like what do you actually want to do? And I think that when young people, any people, start to view screen time through that lens, they end up with a very different attitude toward it because suddenly it's like, wait, what? Like I'm being taken advantage of? I don't want to be taken advantage of. You think I'm dumb? Like, no, I don't want to live that way. So it was very actually inspiring to me to hear the responses from some of those young people and then some of the young people I've encountered since where they have the capacity to be like, actually, I don't want to be doing that. It's not like they're going to necessarily throw their phones away or
No, no,
get
of
off
course not.
social
But
media, right? But like there is, I think, a growing awareness around young people and the young end of Gen Z and then Gen Alpha that like the adults in Gen Z, older Gen Z, like they did something wrong. That's not how we want to live. So I think it's a transitional period and it's tricky because the societal norm is definitely that young teenagers have phones right now. But I've definitely have been heartened by the insights I've heard from some of the younger people I've done talks for.
my daughter told me there's places that sometimes kids will go to for the weekend where they actually take their phones away from them, and it's like forced withdrawal from your phone. But yeah, but
Well,
maybe
there's
it's an addiction, obviously, right? So
I think it really is, and I think we tend to think. I mean, to clarify, the American Psychiatric Association has not yet classified it as an official addiction with a diagnosis code, but in their own literature on their website, they have materials about technology addiction. And gambling disorder was basically the first behavioral addiction ever to be classified as such. So if you think about the fact that many of these apps are actually designed to mimic slot machines, I think it's a matter of time before there's an official recognition. But if you think about an addiction as being a behavior that you don't feel in control of stopping, even though you know it's having negative consequences on your life, then I think, yeah, how could we not say this is some sort of behavioral addiction, both for adults and kids? And when you look at it through that lens, you're like, just as we wouldn't give our children cigarettes or beer when they're 9 years old, why would we be doing that with smartphones and social media? Yeah, they'll eventually use those things likely, or at least they'll use smartphones just in the same way that they'll end up driving someday. But you never would hand a small child the keys to your car and not give them any kind of on-ramp there. So, but yeah, I do think that we have very dysfunctional relationships with these things and we need to be protective of our children. And, a lot of schools, there's been a huge explosion in the number of schools that have gone phone free just since basically 8 months ago when Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, came out, which is wonderful. And I've heard from a lot of school administrators and parents at those schools about the effects. And I think people feared there would be this huge resistance to it. And instead, I think that once people started to speak up about how we should get phones out of schools, teachers know that. Some parents resisted out of anxiety, but the responses I've heard from headmasters and, heads of school is that there was much less resistance from parents than they expected and much less resistance from students as well.
yeah, and I think that is a super positive thing. At my daughter's school, they used to if your phone went off during the class, they took your phone away for the whole week.
Oh,
And yeah, and I know that I have some friends that are high school teachers, and they have their kids off their phones the entire time they're in their class. Otherwise, they're using ChatGPT to do their work.
oh, wow. I mean, that's like, isn't that amazing how quickly that's come into play? But that's something it's
Yeah,
hard to keep my book updated because things change so quickly. But yes, that's ChatGPT and AI. It's like defeating the purpose of, not that they're not useful tools, but there's a reason to learn to think on your own. But I mean, I think ideally the schools should be taking phones away from bell to bell because it's not just class time when kids are distracted. But part of the purpose of school, I think, is to help kids learn how to be in the world. And in order to do that, you have to have friendships. You need to interact socially. So it's essential to also have the phones away during recess and lunchtime to give the kids opportunities for social interactions because there's a whole generation
right.
of kids who don't know how to do that now.
When I think of Rancho La Puerta, I go back in time, 33 years ago, to my first visit, which just happened fortuitously. I went with a friend. And it was so beautiful, overwhelmingly beautiful. At the end of the week, though, I realized that I had spent an entire 7 days of my life without experiencing a moment's aggravation. And that was delightful. That sense was delightful. The perfection of the place was delightful. The beauty. It was like being in the Garden of Eden. It was perfect. But more than that, I felt leaving the ranch that I was walking more safely in the world because I had found a place to which I knew I could return if something catastrophically happened in my life and my life was in pieces. When I was ready to begin reassembling the pieces, I knew there was a place to which I could go.
I hope you are enjoying today's podcast as much as I am. To learn more about our wonderful presenters and exciting weeks coming up at the ranch, go to rancholaporta.com and check out our events calendar. Make sure to mention the podcast when making your reservation to take advantage of a special offer. Some restrictions may apply. So in your book, you have a 30-day plan for is it decreasing the use of your phone? It's not like complete stop using your phone.
Yeah, I think I phrase it as taking back control. It's basically like a breakup plan where you're supposed to have by the end of it a new and healthier relationship. So it's taking a step back and then building a relationship that feels good to you.
Yeah. So what are a couple hints or a couple things that people could start with?
Well, it's a 4-week plan. And I actually have a text message based course for it too. But I would say that the thing that I would suggest people start with, which people often don't do, is not just to start with like turning your phone to black and white and things like that, but actually take a moment or take some time to ask yourself how you feel about your current relationship with your phone and with technology. You know, what feels good and what feels bad. Don't forget the good part, because there might well be some parts you really do appreciate. But really try to ask yourself, why are you trying to make a change? What's your goal? Set a positive intention for yourself. You know, ask yourself, what would a healthy relationship with your phone look like? I actually have been asking people to do an exercise that sounds totally silly when I first say it, but it's actually pretty amazing, which is sit down and write a breakup note to your phone. Like literally pretend it is a person and you were breaking up with it. You're being kind of nice, or maybe you're not, or maybe you're angry, but basically say what's not working about this relationship, what it's done for you, what it's done to you, why you want to change, and what you're looking for in a new relationship. I've had a lot of people do this on my Substack, and it's so interesting because obviously it starts as kind of like a playful exercise, but some of the stuff people write gets surprisingly deep very, very quickly. And I think it's a really useful way to reframe things in your own mind so that you're actually standing up for yourself. You know, you deserve to have a healthier relationship with technology, and you deserve to have a wonderful, joyful life without having tech companies steal your time and attention from you. So I'd suggest starting there with really identifying what success would look like to you, and then sorting what you're doing on your phone into these positive and less good uses of your time. And then once you have that positive framework and this goal in mind, that's when you can start making changes to your phone and your physical environment to support the habits you're trying to establish. You know, like getting your phone out of your bedroom at night and getting an alarm clock, a standalone alarm clock. Figuring out what your no phone zones are going to be. I'd highly recommend that dinner time not be a time with phones out, or meal times in general. Not having your kids take screens into their bedrooms is a really important one. My husband and I charge our phones in a closet because we've got an outlet in the closet. And it's really funny. It's not like after we plug in the phone, we can't check the phone, but we know when the other person's doing it because they're standing in a closet. So you can hear the door open. I'm like, I know what you're doing. On their phone itself, you know, you want to minimize notifications. It is truly astonishing to see how many notifications are on by default. I think there was a study by Common Sense Media of American teenagers, I think from 11 to 17-year-olds, and they found that the median number of notifications per day was 232. The reason they had to do the median, like the center instead of the average, is that one kid got something like 4,900 I think it was 4,900 notifications in a day. So that was like, they couldn't do an average, but you know, so we want to minimize that. I would really recommend looking at your home screen and redesigning your home screen, because chances are you just have whatever, you know, you have the default apps on it, and then anything else you've added, it's probably just in whatever order it was downloaded. And there's probably some really problematic apps staring you at the face every time you open your phone. Like if you have a problem with Instagram and Instagram is on your home screen, then every time you go to your home screen for something else, you're likely to go to Instagram. And
right.
You know, on that, following up on that, I also recommend, if you know something's truly a problem for you, like experiment with deleting it. You know, do you really need to be checking Instagram or the news, you know, from your phone as opposed to a desktop computer? I personally took email and the news off of my phone because I was like, this is not helping me. And I did that like 5 years ago, and I here I am still alive today. So, you know, you might think, oh, I can't possibly do that, but you can do that for 24 hours. You could get that app off for 24 hours and you could see how that feels. And you could make a decision if you want to put it back on, but at very least get it off your home screen. So in other words, there's some design tricks you can do to make your phone less tempting, because everything about it is designed to actually hack your brain chemistry. And that's tech lingo, brain hacking, to get you to spend more time on it. So we do need to fight back. And the last, I know I'm rambling, but the last thing I would say is there's actually a couple of I wish they did this natively to the phones, but there's a couple little gadgets or app blockers you can use that I've heard people use to great success in addition to parental control apps. But basically, my goal with my phone, and I would suggest this to everyone, is to turn it from a temptation into a tool, that it's a tool that you use that you're in control of. And I find it really useful when my willpower does not seem like it's enough. Because it's hard. You'll run out of willpower to actually use an app blocker app or a device. So you can look up app blockers. I like Freedom. A lot of people have talked about Screen Zen and Opal. There's a couple others on the market. There's also two devices. There's one called the Brick, and there's one called Unplug with a Q. And those are these little devices where you tell the app which apps on your phone you want to have access to, or which ones you want to block. And when you wave your phone over this little device, it actually enacts a block for you. And so, yeah, it's actually amazing, as opposed to Apple's little screen time kind of hourglass that pops up where it says, you've reached your screen time limit. Do you want to ignore it? And then it's like, you go right past it and you just hate yourself a little, but you're still scrolling. These things actually block you. And I've seen a lot of people use them with great success to basically dumb down their smartphone or dumb down their kid's smartphone or their teenager's smartphone to create schedules and to create, like, just as an example, like if I wanted to take a break from my phone for the weekend, but I did want to be able to use Google Maps and I wanted to be able to take pictures and say, call someone, I could just allow those apps and everything else would be blocked. And that to me is a wonderful way to actually use technology in a way, going back to your question about what feels healthy, like that would feel like I'm getting the good out of technology without sacrificing my life. So those are some of the suggestions. And then I also talk in the book a lot about like attention building practices and how we do need to do work to build our attention spans back up because they've gotten so fragmented.
Yeah, because I think that some of the apps you can only post something that's like 15 seconds. So it's like, you can't even get engaged at that point.
Yeah, and you think about what that happens on a mass level of a society of people who are watching content that is essentially the equivalent of a 15-second video clip, and then you wonder why we're seem to be unable to engage with each other in a meaningful way.
I mean, and there's so many things about the apps and the phones now that I think affect people and relationships. I mean, I think everyone meets on apps now, as for an example, and people don't have to be real in the app. If I meet you in person, I'm getting a sense of who you are, but on an app, you're swiping right and left, and you don't even know who that person is. I interviewed, I think she was a sociopsychologist, and she was telling me that the human race, the humans are made to live in community.
Yeah.
So, and in community, in my community, there's people that are getting married, and people that die, and people that are born, and there's positive and negative things happen, but it's in my small community. But now the world has become our community because of cell phones and computers. And no one is set up to deal with 7 billion people every day,
right?
And what's happening to everyone in everyone's life. It's overwhelming.
I completely agree with you. There's, I think a lot about community. It's something I struggle to create myself as a freelancer with very little. I have a very, very small family. I don't have a religious community. It's really hard, but I agree with you. It's like, on the one hand, it make your phones and social media make it seem like we should all be so connected and so socially fulfilled. But in reality, in our heart of hearts, and I think on a biochemical level, we know it's not the same as a real community. So it's far better to have a small in-person community of people who truly know and care about each other than tons and tons of followers. And I also was thinking, when you're talking about relationships and how people meet each other, one of the things that does keep me up at night is the fact that I think that we're looking at a future where a lot of people aren't even bothering with real people. Even if it's real people being fake online, you can have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend. That's already happening.
I saw that, yeah.
And there's concerns now about teenagers in particular. As you may have seen, there's a lawsuit that was just filed by the parents of a 14-year-old boy who killed himself after month-long interactions with a character he had made up using one of these AI chatbots that he was in a relationship with. And it's like, what are we doing? This is where I truly do get upset about that. It's like, who gave these companies permission to create these things and just unleash them on us without anyone talking about whether we want them or whether the effects are going to be good for us and for society? Right.
Something else I heard you say in your lecture, and I don't know if you remember, but some of the people that helped invented cell phones limit the time or the age that their kids even get phones.
Yeah.
I found that super interesting, right?
Oh my God. Yes, there's so much hypocrisy. I mean, Steve Jobs himself did not allow his kids to have iPads. There's a well-quoted article from 2014 by Nick Bilton where he talks about going into Steve Jobs' house and assuming that the whole house is going to be wired up with all these devices. And Steve Jobs is like, no, I actually don't want to do that. He apparently used to, ban all technology from the dinner table, and then they would have these conversations, these I don't know if this was a very controlling approach to parenting, but there was not that much technology involved. Bill Gates and Melinda, I think French Gates, they didn't give their kids smartphones till they were 14. And I think they said they would have waited later. You have all of these tech executives sending their kids to Waldorf and Montessori schools in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, which do not have technology involved. I mean, there's like cell phone contracts that parents are giving to nannies where they can't be on, which I think nannies shouldn't be on cell phones when they're with kids they're taking care of, but it's actually in contracts from Silicon Valley executives. And then you start to find out from whistleblowers all of the stuff that the companies know about the impact of their products on mental health, particularly youth mental health, particularly teenage girls. And you're like, seriously? Don't give me this,
Yeah.
When you're claiming that there's no causal relationship between your products and mental health. I could go on. There was a recent lawsuit that was filed against TikTok, or there were many lawsuits filed against TikTok, but there was it was supposed to be redacted with all these parts blacked out. And the Kentucky version, somehow a version got leaked that wasn't blacked out. And they have quotes from TikTok executives talking about the studies they've done about how long it takes before someone gets hooked on the platform. How many videos do they have to watch? How many minutes does it take? And where they actually talk about opportunity cost in the sense of what kids are not doing as a result of being on TikTok. And they say things like not just social interaction, but it says looking people in the eye. That's one of the opportunity costs. And there's actually a quote in that lawsuit about TikTok knowing that it's having an impact on kids' ability to actually think critically and have analytical skills. Yeah, you find out what Facebook knows about Instagram's effect on body image. And then you find out that the reports on these things were not meant to help kids. They were just meant to help these platforms figure out how to better target kids. As a parent myself and just a person, it makes me absolutely furious. And I think the hypocrisy is something that people really need to pay attention to, because if these people are not using the products they create, they know something that we don't know, and we should be listening to them.
Another book that you wrote is called The Power of Fun. And I love that. And so they're like, are they juxtable points, or is it like, give me a couple of things that you think we're missing when it comes to fun.
Yeah, well, okay. The reason I wrote the book is that, I broke up with my own phone. I ended up with more free time. And then I had this existential moment where I realized, oh my God, like I don't actually know what I want to be doing with my free time when it's not on a screen. Cause, I normally read the news. That's super fun. Or, like look for things on eBay that I don't need. I was never into social media, but just meaningless stuff. And anyway, that existential moment led me to this exploration of what do I want to do with my time? How do I want to feel? And I ended up taking this guitar class that led to this kind of euphoric feeling that I hadn't experienced in a while, with a group of other adults, not trying to be like serious guitar players, but I ended up realizing that the word that described the experience we were having was fun, which doesn't reflect well on me, that it took me a while to figure that out. But then I realized, just as no one had really written a book about what to do about our relationship with smartphones, there was no research on fun. There's not a good definition of fun, and there's no really good instructions for how to have it. So I got really curious about that. I ended up writing this book, The Power of Fun. It has basically the same structure as How to Break Up with Your Phone, which is like a look at what is fun, why is it good for us, what do we get wrong about it, and then how do we have more of it. So to answer your question, I would say that I think that we use the word fun really casually and almost sloppily. It's not really our fault, but like we don't really think about what it means. But I actually interviewed, or gathered stories rather, from thousands of people about fun experiences and came up with a new definition that I think better captures the feeling than what I found in the dictionary. The dictionary just said it was like lighthearted pleasure, but I would hear these stories from people, and I encourage your listeners to like think about a truly fun memory from their lives. It's not just lighthearted pleasure. There's this profound joy coming through these stories. So I think that true fun is actually when you're in a combined state of feeling really connected, normally to another person. So connection, that came up again and again, even for introverts. And when you're feeling playful, so not necessarily playing, you don't have to be like being silly or childish, but just like a lighthearted attitude, like, like we're having in this conversation, just not caring too much about things, finding ways to laugh, letting down your guard, not engaging in perfectionism. And then flow, which is the state of being totally actively engaged and present in what you're doing, often to the point where you lose track of time. Like, I am surprised how time we've been talking for already. So you've got playfulness, connection, and flow. And if I were to draw a Venn diagram with 3 circles, like the center where all those overlap is what I think fun is. And to answer your question about like, what are we getting wrong and how are our smartphones getting in the way? You have all these platforms such as social media that are being advertised to us as if they're fun, quote unquote. But they don't result in that feeling of playful, connected flow. They feel more like junk food. Like, maybe they're satisfying when you first start. Like, you have a craving or a twitch to check Instagram, and at first you're satisfied. But then 20 minutes, 30 minutes pass, and suddenly you feel like you just ate an entire pint of ice cream, and you're like, what am I doing to myself? That's not fun. Fun is the feeling of joy and nourishment and aliveness you get when you have this state of being in playful, connected flow. And it happens in real life, and it happens when you're with other people, and it happens when you're not performing and you're not self-conscious. It happens when phones are away.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because one of the things I think I read you said, and I've heard this other places too, is when you're trying to find your purpose in life or things that bring you joy, if you look back to your childhood and see what really they're probably still there. There's probably still the same things, but I feel bad because there's so many kids nowadays. There's nothing that I looked back into my childhood. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a computer. So all those memories for me were, as you said, they were interacting with people and they were doing things. And I think now that so many kids, like, most of their memories are engaged in a phone or a computer.
Wow.
Or, you know what I mean?
That's a depressing insight. That's probably true.
No, I'm just saying because
no, it's true. It's actually true, right? It goes back to that thing. If you didn't have the experience in the first place, you're not going to have any memories of it. And
right,
that's
exactly.
horrifying. And it's like, that's a real wake up call, I think. I mean, it reminds me of a story I recently read of this. Is a really good story in the Independent, I believe it was the Independent in Great Britain. And it was a woman who got permission to, which took a lot of work, to send these kids on an unsupervised camping trip. It's actually really funny how many hoops she had to jump through to get permission from her editors to get kids to camp in someone's backyard. It was not like Outward Bound. Anyway, and she wrote this amazing story about how, with the phones away and no adults present, these kids had the best time. She came to check in on them the next day, and they were just like having the time of their lives. Like, there were still embers in the campfire. They were talking about how they'd played music together. They'd played silly games. They'd stayed up late telling stories, and they were glowing, and to have that kind of experience in contrast to what it sounds like those kids had been doing before this journalist experiment, which is on Snapchat, on social media, on Instagram, or if they were doing something together, like, they're still on those things. I think it's really important for us to pay attention to stories like that, both for our kids and for ourselves. That's one of the things I love about Rancho La Puerta, is the idea that people are encouraged to keep their phones away, because that's not the point of being there.
It's not the point. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I will say one plug for social media is this podcast is getting a good message out, and this is social media, right? I wanted to talk to you because I think this is a message that is so important, and we really need to get it out there. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate you writing the book. I appreciate you coming to the ranch. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. And I have to be respectful of your time. I know you have a hard deadline that's coming right up. So,
oh man, well, I would love to keep talking. I really appreciate this, Barry. And it's been wonderful to get to spend time with you in person. I hope we get to do that again. And I
hope
agree
so
with
too.
you. Like, you got to catch people where they are. So if there's anyone listening who caught this on social media, that's great. I hope you found something useful. And I hope that we have inspired you to now turn away from social media for a while. Until Barry has a new podcast.
Yeah, until my next podcast. Yes.
Exactly. But maybe just subscribe to your podcast, and they don't need to be on social media.
Absolutely.
How's that?
Well, thank you, Catherine. And I hope I see you at the ranch soon.
No, thank you, Barry.
After my podcast with Catherine today, I just started to notice how addicted I have become to my phone. It's literally on 24/7. I think I look at it 4 to 6 times an hour. And that doesn't count the times I get a little ping that I have a text message and I immediately pick it up and look at it. There's this expectation that we need to respond or react immediately to everything that comes across. I've started to evaluate what I'm doing on my phone that is enhancing my life and bringing me more joy. I'm also noticing what time on my phone is doing the opposite, taking away from my joy, my happiness, and my well-being. I want to encourage you to start to notice how much time you're spending on your phone. And during that time, what are you giving your attention to? Is there a chance that you could let go of an app? Maybe let go of some notifications? What if we tried to turn off our phone at night when we're sleeping? Or how about this? Maybe 15 to 30 minutes after we wake up, we don't look at our phone. Technology is moving forward rapidly, and it will continue to do so. The relationship we have with technology, that's up to us. Until next time, I'm wishing you health, joy, and a little less time connected.